Hey everybody, Justin from Playing Board Games here. Today I am making this new Arkham video series. We have new player guides for investigator decks, but here is, we are focusing on guides to help players through scenarios as well. So this is like a scenario guide. We're hoping to do these for all the scenarios in the game. This first one is just me. I'll get Travis and Brennan in future ones. Just because of how recording worked, I wasn't feeling healthy yesterday. I've been sick late for the longest time, and I don't get it. But I'm feeling good today enough to record this video. So let's dive into the first one, which is The Gathering. Okay. So, when you are looking at a scenario in Arkham Horror the card game, it's really all about time. That is your biggest focus. You need to make sure that you're always doing something efficient. The more time you're spending action not doing good things or grabbing resources just because or drawing cards, even though you already have your machine built, you are going to fall behind and you are ultimately going to not get the best resolution for your scenario. So even if you have a big machine you need to build, you always need to be progressing towards winning the scenario. The Gathering is a very easy intro scenario that's going to kind of just teach you the concepts of the game. So one thing that is to note is that it's just 3 for the first agenda, which then flips to, it's basically just, this is a lot of teaching. This is the intro scenario, so it's going to kind of teach you how to play and what to expect. And the big thing is that after time, the more time you spend playing the game is going to try to hurt you, which is either going to, each player discards a card at random or the lead investigator takes 2 horror. Really soft, actually. These effects are very minor, especially the 2 horror. There's a lot of ways to mitigate that if you have allies or stuff like that. So generally in your deck, you're going to want to have some way to survive taking horror, because it's going to be one of those things that the game will try to do. In addition to that, there also is the fact that lead investigator choice does matter. So at the start of the scenario, what Travis, Brennan, and I do when we start a new campaign is we flavorfully like to choose who would be the lead investigator. So for example, when we did the Forgotten Age, we like to choose someone that actually would run the expedition. So for example, when I was Preston Fairmont, when we did our most recent run of it, Preston Fairmont has the money to run the expedition, so why not go for it? This matters because the lead investigator is the one who's going to have to make decisions like this, and this is what this concept is telling you in The Gathering. You then have 7 turns. I'm going to say turns in quotation marks because you'll see later that this scenario does have cards that can change that. And then after another 7 turns, there's going to be, you're going to get a ghoul enemy. So there's 2 big concepts to Arkham Horror the card game that if you're just starting, you might not know how important they are. And that is fighting and investigating. Those are the 2 active concepts that you as players are going to need to do throughout the game to find victory. So if you're playing 2 players, which I highly recommend, even if you're solo, play 2-handed. Playing 2-handed is a lot better and it gets those 2 niches covered. You're going to want 1 investigator and 1 fighter. Someone who can kill the monsters that show up and someone that can grab the clues on the locations. If you want to think about even simpler, investigating is essentially like finding the location. Tests are actually incredible, like they're the exact same thing. There's no big difference between a test between fighting a monster and getting clues. So just look at it like that. You want 1 person who can kill monsters and 1 person who can kill locations. So after 10 more turns, so the big thing that changed, as you see that this one has no effect, but when you get to this one, we actually have an effect. So forced. At the end of the enemy phase, each unengaged ghoul enemy moves 1 location towards the parlor. So this is kind of putting to you a little bit of pressure. And then it's going to, now the game is actively working against you, and you need to be aware as a player that that is something that will be happening, and that's what this agenda is teaching you. A lot of my advice for this scenario is literally just play the game, and it's very straightforward once you get through the first little bit, which we'll get to the big roadblock that exists at the end of this scenario, who at this point now is very easy for us, but our first time through, we couldn't even fathom how to beat this guy, and I imagine a lot of new players, especially who this video series is aimed at, would feel the exact same way. And then force at the end of the round, you place 1 doom on this agenda for each ghoul enemy in the hallway or parlor, making your timer even shorter. So even though it says 10 right here, it's probably not actually 10. It's probably more like, I don't know, 6, 7, depending on how things go. It's just something you need to be aware of if you get to this point. You can easily win this scenario in this agenda once you get a few plays under your belt and once you start learning that it's all about efficiency and building a plan for your deck. So let's just hope that you don't get here. But if you do, this 10 isn't actually a 10. That's something you should be aware of. And killing ghouls before they can get into the parlor is key. However, they are in the hallway as well, so that's when I say before in the parlor. You also want to kill them in the hallway. No matter what, ghoul enemies are going to speed your game up. All right, let's start looking at locations. The study, very simple. Let's skip these. Let's go to this one. So you need 2 clues per player. I say 6 because it normally is 6 for us to pass this. And what that's going to do is it's going to unlock new areas of the game. So you're going to start with just the study, which just has 2 clues per player. And this is basically telling you, hey, investigating is how you progress through the game. So you're going to start with just the study in play, and you have to grab these clues to unlock the next part of your adventure. So if you only have one thing to do, which is get clues, get clues. Once again, the advice is very simple for this scenario because this scenario is very simple. It's the introduction. It's teaching you the concepts of the game. So it also will kill each enemy at the study when you advance this, which is kind of sweet. That does happen occasionally, not too often. Don't get attached to it. It's then going to reveal some new locations. You have the hallway, which is where you're going to spend the majority of your game. This is kind of like a hub world with a low shroud and no clues to kind of show you that there's going to be locations without clues and you're going to need to move. This is going to split off into the attic and the cellar. The parlor is locked, but I will get to that in a second. So, the attic. This is, and the cellar, they're kind of like twins. They're kind of like twins. They're the same but different. They each have Victory 1, which is how when you play in campaign mode, which I highly recommend playing in campaign mode. There's not much reason in my mind to play this game as a standalone scenario. It's not, unless you're testing a deck or trying to just get concepts or practice a scenario, there's not really a need to play standalone. Campaign is a lot more fun and it's a lot more exciting. Of course, there could be disagreements with that, and I think that's fair, but for me, I don't like playing this game standalone scenario style. So, as I said, they're kind of twins but different. After you enter the attic, take 1 horror. After you enter the cellar, take 1 damage. This is showing you that locations can hurt you. Locations can have negative things. So just be aware of that. You're going to want to know that when you don't want to send someone with low horror to the attic, and you don't want to send someone with low damage to the cellar. However, let's take a moment to appreciate the design here, something to be aware of. Normally, Seekers who have high book have less damage. So the Seeker is going to need to go into the cellar, and Goons, who technically have low book but low horror, they're going to probably want to go into the attic. You could travel as a group here. However, doing something like that will make it so that there's actually going to be more damage going to the party. So what you might want to do is quickly send the Seeker to one of not necessarily the Seeker, but you're going to want to send your clue getter to one of these locations to get everything off, while the Goon is kind of just maybe poking around the other one. The Goon can easily go to the attic. This one goes to the cellar, or you can leave the Goon in the hallway to kind of just make sure all the messes are cleaned up. And then the Seeker, I keep saying Seeker. I highly recommend when you're first playing, make your clue getter a Seeker. They're obviously built for it. They can grab the clues quickly, then leave. The less people you have going into these locations, especially multiple times, will be less damage that your party will take overall, which means you're more likely to find victory. The last location in this scenario is the parlor. This one's blocked, so this is also teaching you in the concept as you're playing that you might not be able to enter certain locations. They might need keys, they might be blocked, yada, yada, yada. So when you guys, and to unlock it, it's just through this. So this is, you just need 3 clues per player. There's more than enough. There are, so say you had 2 players, there will be 8 clues and you only need 6. So 2 will be left over. So when the round ends, you can spend the clues to advance, which is actually going to unlock the barrier, but also more importantly, spawn the ghoul priest. Here's where we get to the big struggle point of the scenario, which we'll cover in a second. The scenario is now, all you have to do in this last one is defeat the ghoul priest. It's a boss fight, baby. So this game has taught you, this scenario has taught you 3 things. Step 1, getting clues is important. Step 2, exploring the maps and still getting clues is important. Step 3, sometimes you gotta kill a big thing to win. So, we're gonna make a plan to kill this big thing, but let's talk about that in a second. Then there's the resolutions, where it gives you a choice of the players, but that's not what we're covering here. So I'm just gonna take all these, put them to the side so I don't get confused. Okay, because I get confused very easily. The parlor. As an action, you can resign. This is too much for me. You run out the front door fleeing in panic. If things are going bad, don't be afraid to resign. That is my biggest advice for new players. Because this game is a campaign mode, resigning is not a defeat. What is a defeat is walking into positions that are going to put you very far behind just because you didn't kill the ghoul priest. If you have a choice between taking a turn and putting 2 more damage on the ghoul priest, but not killing him, and then getting the doom on the agenda, which will then flip it. Sorry, 1 second. If you're getting the doom on the agenda, which would cause it to flip, that is not a good choice when you could instead just resign. Sometimes, yes, this does lead to the same kind of result, where it's the worst result of them. However, resigning, more often than not, is not a bad decision if the only other option is flipping the agenda. Am I saying this right? Is it the agenda? Yeah, it is the agenda. Good. Then flipping the agenda. So this is something that might seem counterintuitive to new players, but if things are going to go bad and you are going to flip it next turn and you can't win, just resign. Trust me on this. It's the right thing to do. If the resign thing is there, it's there for a reason, and it's a way for to mitigate potential damage that could be trauma that can be placed on your character. So now let's get to the parlay action. Parlay is big. This is part of the tutorial teaching you that you can gain things throughout the scenario. So test book 4, pretty high. That's probably going to need to be your clue getter, because clue getter is going to have high books. You gain control of Lita Chandler. So yes, it's a bit counterintuitive where the book getter is then going to get Lita Chandler, but you get +1 fist, so you're not going to really be fighting. But that doesn't really matter as much as her sub-ability is. When an investigator at your location successfully attacks a monster enemy, that investigator deals +1 damage. So basically makes all your attacks against ghouls, which are the only monster enemies in this. Are the rats monsters? No, they're just creatures. Deal +1 damage, which makes it a lot easier to get through. So Lita Chandler, you're going to want her at the location where you're fighting the ghoul priest. Now let's talk about Big Daddy roadblock for this scenario. It's your first time through. You're playing Arkham Horror, the card game. You've heard good things. And then this big boy shows up to brawl. And you're like, oh my god, what do I do? He has 4 attack. That's really high. 4 foot. That's really hard to evade. He has 5 health per player, so he has 10 health if I'm playing 2 players. Or God forbid your first game was like ours and he has 20 health and you're just looking at him like, oh my god. What's worse, he has retaliate, so if you miss, he chonks you for a lot of damage. It's very scary. However, I think the best advice I can give to you is this guy's actually really easy to kill. That's not my advice. That's just a true statement. You just need to know, your fighter needs to have a plan. When it comes into this, your first time, I always think your first time going into a scenario should be blind. That's how we play. It's a bit more fun. After that, though, it's free game. Do what you want to do. Play the scenario how you want to play it. Approach the scenario how you want to approach it, and just have a good time. So what we do is we generally have a plan for things that are going into this. So with the Ghoul Priest, you're going to want to have a plan to deal damage to this. So it's 5 per player. So realistically, you want to be dealing a player's worth of damage the flavor of it is that, the feeling of it is that each player wants to put in their damage. However, that's not very likely with the Seeker not having the attack to get through this 4. that's where Lita Chandler comes in. So having the +1 damage makes each attack that the fighter does provide more. So out of 3 attacks, you've done 3 player damage if your Seeker has Lita Chandler on the location. In addition, there's going to be cards like you want, like Vicious Blow, or weapons that deal more damage, like if you're not playing with the taboo list. Machete is an excellent tool for dealing with the Ghoul Priest, assuming there's no other ghouls at your location. So this guy might seem scary, but if you are succeeding, if you're dealing 2 damage in attack, especially with cards like Vicious Blows, this is a great... It's basically just you want to make as few attacks as possible against him and deal as much damage as you can with it. With that said, cards like Vicious Blow, you're going to want to save for him. If cards like Vicious Blow is in your deck, don't use them on the random ghouls that are going to show up just to get rid of them, because there's a much bigger, much scarier enemy coming in the end of it. Likewise for guns, you can use your guns for smaller enemies that show up. However, most of those, for most of the fighters, can easily be solved with just a regular fist test. Likewise, even overpowers, you're probably going to want to save for your Ghoul Priest. If your Seeker or your Mystic is your clue getter, they're going to want to save their Shriveling for the Ghoul Priest. Don't use them on the smaller enemies. Even if there's a rat or a ghoul with you that might seem scary at the moment, try to think of another way to beat them and save your big stuff for the Ghoul Priest, because then that'll just make the whole thing a lot easier. And of course, my biggest advice is don't draw the auto-fail chip. Easy, right? Easy. So just take it step by step. Make sure you're dealing damage to this guy. 2 a turn, make it 2 with Lita's there. It'll be a lot easier, and you'll cut through this guy no problem. That's my advice. Save your big things for him, and don't draw the auto-fail. Easy. All right, so now let's quickly do a run-through of the encounter sets that also exist in here. So first things first, rats. As I said, you don't want to be wasting your spells or your bullets from your guns on these rats. These rats have 1 attack. Just attack them. Just punch them. They have 1 health. These guys are basically just an action sink. That's all they are. These guys aren't a threat in this scenario. They are just here for you to spend 1, or worst case scenario, 2 actions on them. That's all they are. Don't think of the rats as anything else. These are just something that are going to eat an action, and that's it. They're very easy to kill. They basically, look at it as a location. If you saw a location with 1 shroud and 1 clue, you'd be like, oh, this is the easiest thing I've seen in my life. Even a goon with 3 book will be like, yeah, I'll do it. Even a goon with 2 book, you're like, I'll just commit a card and it's super easy. Swarm of Rats is just a way for the game to eat your actions, nothing else. Don't spend any crucial resources on fighting them. Just spend an action or 2 to defeat them. There we go. Case closed. No more rats. Okay. All right, let's go to these guys. The ghouls. We got some big stuff. So Grasping Hands. This is this in combination with Rotting Remains. I just have to talk about them. These are also like twin cards. These are showing you that while Book and Fist are used for investigating and fighting, your other stats are defensive. So this one is Test Foot 3. For each point you fail by, take 1 damage. This is important to show you that your foot is a relevant skill because it's going to keep you alive. This card is pretty soft the first time you draw it, but later in the game it's going to be a lot scarier. So you're going to want to commit a moderate amount of resources to ensure you don't, depending on your foot score. But sometimes you just got to accept the fact that you're going to take a punch to your health, and that's just something you're going to have to deal with. Just know that these, you don't want to the first one will seem soft, but you don't want to just pretend it's nothing, right? It'll get you. So you're going to want to keep this in mind. The Foot 3 to prepare for resources, to keep some resources prepared for that, especially if you have lower health. There are going to be 3 of those cards. Holy cow. We have some ghouls. Okay, so there are only 2 different types of ghouls. Easy. The ghoul minion 2/2/2. This guy's pretty simple. He's just, once again, he's like an advanced rats. He's easier to evade. 2 evade is pretty easy for most high evade characters, and his 2 attack is also easy for most goons. And the 2 health will make it so that most weapons will put him down. The big thing though is that your Seeker, your clue getter, will likely be unable to deal with the ghoul minion. And this is also something you probably don't want to use a spell charge on. just because it's a lot easier to get your ghoul to come pick them up. Not your ghoul, your goon to come and pick them up off of you to finish them off. Then we have the Ravenous Ghoul. This guy's a bit scarier. 333 is higher than 222. That's just how math and numbers work. This guy is probably worth at least a single bullet or a single shriveling charge just to get him off the board. But at the same time, your goon will probably be fine, especially if they have a melee weapon or if they just want to take the time punching their way through it. I think he's not as scary as the Ghoul Priest. He's probably still worth the majority of your resources. Okay. All right. So just like the last one, this Test Brain 3 for each point you fail by take 1 horror. This one is actually really scary for goons. The Grasping Hands is not as scary for Seekers because their foot score is actually relatively good. Their foot score is usually good. Goons usually have a lower, much lower horror threshold. So they'll, like, for example, Roland Banks in the core game, this could be like 3 horror potentially is a nightmare. So be really aware of this. This card does show up quite a bit. It actually is, I think, a very well-designed card. And just as well, make sure you have some resources for this. You're going to want brain cards that you can commit to keep your deck defensive. This is a way for the game to slow you down. It's not too much of a scary thing. However, it can ruin your day. Just be aware of it. You cannot play assets or events. It's a good way to slow you down and make it so that you can't play and can really throw a wrench in your plans as a player. So just be aware of it. But just know that sometimes it can literally just be a card that you draw and says, have no effect on you this turn. Have a nice day. Frozen in Fear, likewise, can actually just ruin your day. And sometimes it can be nothing. So, put Frozen in Fear into your threat area. First time you perform one of the following actions, move, fight, or evade. Each round it costs 1 additional action. At the end of your turn, test Brain 3. If you succeed, discard Frozen in Fear. So you get a free test on it every turn, which is nice. You don't need to spend any actions on it. However, you are essentially spending actions on it each turn if you move, fight, or evade. On this map, the board is smaller and the enemies are weaker, so the losing 1 action on the move, fight, or evade will be a little bit softer, but it's never a good thing. You're going to want to save some of your brain icons for this one, because if it does show up, there are 2 of them. It can really slow you down. However, it's not going to be backbreaking if you have to keep it for a few turns. You're just going to have to rethink your turns and prepare for it. It is a bit scary when the Ghoul Priest shows up and you do get Frozen in Fear, but then it's just like a flavor win. So just make sure you have some brain icons or someone at your location has some brain icons to help you get through that 3 test. All right, these are 2 other ghouls. These guys are pretty big. These ones are big when they have victory. You usually don't see 2 of both of them in the scenario. These guys are probably worth the resources to get through them, the bullets or the shriveling charges, for example. However, this guy especially, if things are going bad, you can just evade this guy. And just leave him in the attic for the time being. He will eventually move if you get to the last scenario, so just be aware that if you do want to leave him. But once again, my goal is for you guys to be done the scenario before you even get there by just focusing on putting damage on the Ghoul Priest. That's all you got to do. Like, it sounds simple. It sounds like I'm not actually giving you advice. I'm just saying put damage on the asshole. But that is all you got to do. You just got to put damage on that asshole. You got to like make sure you're attacking him, make sure your Lita's there to get the damage increased. It will also help getting through these other ghouls a lot easier. Like this guy, he'll go down in 1 hit. So Lita is very important for you finding victory for this scenario. That's why she's there, to be honest. And also remember with that, it's never a bad thing to just resign if you feel like you're falling behind. The Flesh Eater and the Icy Ghoul. These guys' numbers are pretty high. The victory is really sweet though. In a perfect world, the goon will have some time to pick these off while the clue getter is grabbing some clues. Yeah, I don't really, like, they hit really hard. They don't ever retaliate, so you definitely have some time. This guy's pretty good because you could hit him, evade him pretty easily, and then hit him, and then he's dead, right? However, you're going to want to have a weapon in your deck for dealing with enemies. I think the biggest advice to take away from this is to make sure you have your roles filled. Goon and clue getter. You always need a goon and you always need a clue getter. It's even better if your clue getter has a way to deal with enemies as they show up. Not like a plan, but rather like an emergency button that they can push. If they do have a plan though, there's a card that actually is like, I've got a plan. that will help with them. So I think the big advice is have a goon that fights and a clue getter that can get clues and maybe protect themselves, worst case scenario. But don't make your goon be able to get clues. I don't think that's worth your time, to be honest. Ancient Evils. This card is evil. It's just the game's telling you never get complacent. Even when things are good, we'll be pushing against you. Place one Doom on the current agenda. This effect can cause the current agenda to advance. Not as hard as this one. The agenda thresholds are pretty high. But this is a card that's going to show up again and again to show you that you cannot just get through things. Like, things will be pushing against you. If you also want to look at this card can be pretty brutal depending on the player count. At 1 player, it takes away 3 actions. At 2 players, it takes away 6 actions. This is minimum, depending if there's no Frozen and Fears. At 3 players, it takes away 9 actions from the table. And then at 4 players, it takes away 12 actions. So that's what this card does. This card it removes actions, it makes you lose time. And I don't like it, but I understand why it exists, but I don't like it. I don't like it, it's a bully, it's mean. Alright, let's get to this one. Obscuring Fog and Crypt Chill. Crypt Chill will make you lose your assets. So if you are asset dependent, make sure you have some backup assets in your build. This is especially easy assets that can counteract this is the Teddy Bear, if you have it, and the Trench Coat that both play for 0 and give you a small boost to brain and to brain damage and meat damage. It's a good asset that you can have for things like Crypt Chill because this will take it. So if you are an asset-heavy build, if Crypt Chill is in here, you're going to want to have a backup plan for it. Obscuring Fog can be pretty brutal. It's +2 Shroud. However, for most Seekers, I keep saying Seekers. For most Clue Getters, it should not be a problem. +2 Shroud is basically just Perception or another card that they commit. Or if you're lucky, it's on a 1 Shroud location, it turns into 3 and it doesn't even bother you. Sometimes you draw Obscuring Fog and you're like, I didn't draw a Treachery card this turn. The game didn't do anything to me. The bad deck is not a bad deck. It's a good deck this turn. So, we talked through everything. I gave you some thoughts on this. This was hopefully a helpful time for you guys to be able to get through these scenarios. And as I said, oh my God. Remember that thing I said how I wasn't feeling great? You can hear it in my voice. However, thank you for watching. We want to do this for all of the scenarios in the game. It's going to be a big endeavor, so bear with us as we go. We're going to be going in release order for these, not including side scenarios. We'll get to those when we can. And the next one, I do want to include Travis and Bryn, which I don't think there will be as much rambling with them as well. They kind of keep me in check. If I have to talk by myself, I will ramble on and on and on. I was like born a rambling man. You know how it is. If anyone watching this has any advice for new players on how they can beat the scenario or something that I might have overlooked, said incorrectly, or missed, let me know in the comments down below. And new players, I hope this does help. This scenario can seem really daunting your first time through, especially when you get to the Ghoul Priest. However, I don't mean to diminish your loss here because our first time was a nightmare. This scenario actually is really easy once you know what to expect and what to do. And all you need to do is get clues and then use Lita to put massive amounts of damage on the Ghoul Priest. Once you do that, massive amount of damage on the Ghoul Priest, it becomes really easy to win. So, I hope that helps. You guys have a good one. Thanks for watching. And as always, GG's!